Detroit's iconic train station, full of history, American history, great migrations, and new beginnings. Everyone comes from somewhere. We invited people to share how Detroit became their family's destination.
What city do you currently live in?
I live in Detroit.
I live in Detroit, Michigan, on the east side.
I live in Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit.
I currently live in Grosse Ile, Michigan.
Madison Heights.
Ann Arbor.
Southfield, Michigan, currently, but I am a native Detroiter.
Shelby Township.
In Detroit. Okay, cool. Always in Detroit.
Destination Detroit. Stories about people who helped shape Southeast Michigan. This program was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you.
For decades, Michigan Central Station greeted new arrivals to Detroit. It closed nearly 40 years ago. The vacant train station became a symbol of urban decay. After Ford Motor Company's recent restoration, it's a Detroit destination once again.
And it's so beautiful here.
Yeah, I never expected to see this to happen. I did manage to come in here once when it was abandoned, and it was like so sad.
Just to see it restored to this, I mean, it's magnificent.
What's great is I travel the country now. They read my title and I say, oh, Detroit Regional Chamber. Tell me about the train station.
A century ago, Ford Motor Company made this silent film featuring the train station, a place some call the Ellis Island of the Midwest.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege for me to be in this situation because I can speak as a Detroiter. I can speak as a Burundian. I came as a refugee from Burundi. I've been here since November 2015. Baobab is a tree, so that tree is a tree of life. If you're coming to Baobab Fair, you're coming to experience something new.
Baobab Fair features Eastern African cuisine. It's a hit. Owner Mamba Hamisi, very busy these days.
Yeah, I'm telling the story now at PBS.
He's one of the many we spoke to at Michigan Central about how Detroit became their destination.
The only one path I have to follow was to be an entrepreneur, so I could see how possible opening a business could be.
Hamisi's working on expansion plans to bring his food to other parts of the city.
I am the granddaughter of an immigrant from Ireland. In my questioning of my grandparents, why did you leave Nova Scotia? So they took a boat over from Ireland over to Nova Scotia.
So my dad got to Detroit and I would say in the early 90s, late 80s. Originally, he's from Somalia, but he was living in Manhattan, New York. My dad was traveling around. He was a preacher. He's Muslim. He would be going to different masjids, mosques, and just preaching the good word. And when he came to Michigan, he said, wow, there's so much Muslim people here, a lot of different mosques here, and the cost of living was like great.
They said there was so much opportunity in Detroit with the automobile industry. And my grandfather actually worked for the trains here in Detroit and lived and died in Detroit.
I was born in Honduras, and in 1997, I moved here. So I was 9 years old when I moved to Detroit. And it was my first time experiencing Detroit, but I've been here ever since. And I went about 8 years ago to Honduras to learn about my culture, to bring it back here. So 3 years ago, I brought it here with our coffee company.
Even though we're Somali, our community was filled with Muslim people, but they're mostly from Yemen. And they're very good people. So he saw something that he could, build within that community.
I was actually adopted from Honduras. So essentially, my mom grew up here in Detroit, so she knew more about it. So for me, it was like kind of even learning the culture, learning the language, learning everything. I had no idea. So the first time that I came here was the first time that I saw snow. Well, the funny thing is that I was adopted by a black mom. So essentially, I grew up in Black Detroit.
The United States has always been a destination place for Filipinos, especially after World War II, when the United States assisted in getting the Japanese out of the occupation of the Philippine Islands.
My dad was born in the Upper Peninsula in Newberry, Michigan in 1940 to a mixed mother, Geraldine Rice, whose family was from the South and moved up to Michigan. and my dad's father was from Finland.
There was a shortage of nurses, and the Philippines happened to have a program that imitated the nursing program in the United States. The official language in the Philippines was both Filipino and English, so it was easier for them to find nurses in the Philippines that could pass the nursing examination.
My dad and his siblings were so fair they could have passed for white, but what's really interesting is they always had strong connection to their community, the Black community, and we are part of what's called the Old Settlers, which is a group of 8 families that settled in kind of the northern part of Michigan, and it was the first grouping that settled there in the Mecosta area.
Even though I'm Somali American, I still hold on to my culture, my values, my religion, my language. I'm growing up and becoming an adult and having my own family. I could pass that down and still hold true to my culture.
My mother was recruited by Henry Ford Hospital to basically work her way through nursing in the United States, while my father and me and my siblings waited in the Philippines.
My grandparents were born in Pforzheim in Germany, and my dad was actually born there as well. And they immigrated to the U.S., to Detroit, in 1954. So I'm first generation American on my dad's side.
Unfortunately, I had asked my parents to stop speaking Filipino at home so that I could concentrate on English. I succeeded assimilating to the English language, but at the cost of my native tongue.
Ever since my grandparents passed away, I've inherited all of their photos, journals. So I've been slowly going through and piecing together their history. Both of my grandparents were picture takers. When they could afford it, they bought a camera, and I actually have some amazing footage of Detroit.
When we think about, migration patterns and where people go, I always remind people that we are nomadic beings. We've always been moving. And so we're moving in search of opportunity. We're moving in search of liberation and freedom. We're moving in search of a pursuit of excellence.
How did Detroit become Detroit? Around 1700, this was Le Detroit, the Straits in French.
It becomes a destination for the French because of its strategic importance. It is a place where they can build a fort to ensure that they maintain control of the Upper Lakes.
We're often told, Native American history starts when the French arrived in 1701. But as we all know, Native peoples have been here time immemorial.
It had always been a destination for the indigenous folks who are living here.
As we refer to it, indigenous people refer to it as Weweyontanog, or where the river bends.
The French fought the British. More fighting forced native peoples out, while settlers took claim to the land.
Jumping forward to present-day Detroit, we see native peoples coming back to Detroit. We are not forever gone. We are not forever vanished. Their descendants are certainly back in the area.
Who were the first African Americans in Detroit? Some were owned by this man's family.
There's been an African American presence, certainly in metropolitan Detroit, as early as the 1700s.
Hero of the War of 1812, General Alexander Macomb. His father and uncle were slave owners, like some other prominent families of that time.
Michigan does have a history of slavery, carried out very differently than the American South. Chattel slavery. It was more of a system of indentured servitude.
There was Lizette Dennison IV, born into slavery, freed to prosper, owning nearly 50 acres of land in Pontiac, Michigan. In the meantime, the Erie Canal opened Detroit to more people out east.
Most of Detroit and Michigan's early Euro-American settlers trace their origins to New England and upstate New York. And it is no coincidence that we have in the Detroit metropolitan area a number of communities whose names can also be found in upstate New York. Utica, Troy, Farmington, Livonia, Rochester. All of those communities were named for the points of origin for the people who settled there early on. People often talk about the importance of Yankee Yorker culture in early Michigan.
One Yankee Yorker sitting pretty, Hazen Pingree, Detroit mayor and Michigan governor in the 1890s, hailing from the state of Maine. As the 1900s arrived, the stage was set. Southeast Michigan became a destination for industry.
We had access to the natural resources that were needed. We needed shipping, and so we had rail and we had water.
With the discovery of mineral wealth in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, you begin to see iron and steel manufacturer in Detroit. It's certainly one of the first Bessemer steel plants in the United States is built south of Detroit in Wyandotte.
It led to automobiles, Henry Ford's, and others too.
They kind of fed off each other. This new horseless carriage seems like an interesting idea, and I want to be a part of it. And eventually you create your own ecosystem,
including the people needed to build them.
And first it was immigration from Ireland. We had Italians, Germans, Belgians coming to the east side.
And African Americans.
So African Americans began to move to Detroit en masse in the early 1900s. In 1900, about 5,700 African Americans live in Detroit. By 1930, there are about 120,000.
Detroit, we always think about its population loss, and it's lost more population than any other city. It grew faster than any other city in the country. I mean, it picked up 1.3 million people in a 30-year span between 1900 and 1930.
It becomes this major city that's growing so fast because of the automotive industry. The African-American population in Detroit skyrockets.
New travel luxury in every Ford car.
Detroit was vast and wide. Both of my grandfathers felt that it was imperative to get somewhere that was hustle and bustle.
Under the guidance of skilled workmen, comfort and speed and safety are built into motor cars for all Americans.
My dad, he was in the Korean War. He returned home to Faraday, Louisiana.
In Mississippi, they were farmers and very rural area, very little opportunity.
My father lived in Huntsville, Alabama.
Then he heard about Detroit, Michigan and the hiring and came out the Army and came to Detroit, Michigan in 1949.
My uncle was working for Chrysler's.
He came to Detroit, Michigan and began employment at the Chrysler Corporation.
And it's all wonderful. Chrysler's new $100 million look.
So he and his brother came up to Detroit. He landed at Ford, his brother landed at Chrysler.
My mother is from Ashland, Kentucky, and my father was from Huntington, West Virginia. They moved to Detroit in 1957 as part of the Great Migration.
My father was from Sweetwater, Alabama, and he came here and got a job at General Motors. Now, he tells us he had the most dirtiest and filthiest jobs, but it paid the bills.
My mom, she came up here. She eventually got a job at Ford Motor Company at the Glass House in Dearborn.
Detroit in the 50s and the 60s, when you really think about it, was an expansive period of time, particularly for African Americans. And so both parents, as they connected, their life just rose very quickly to the middle class.
And they gave my dad a sense of well-being, a sense of purpose, and he really felt that he actually made it. He was a union man, too. That was really, really good things that came out of that.
The Great Migration built the Motor City, but with that came challenges, too.
African Americans can really only live in one section of the city, and that's the Lower East Side, just east of present-day downtown Detroit. And communities that we've come to know as Black Bottom and Paradise Valley.
Now, my dad, when his family moved here, they moved into the area which a lot of people know as Black Bottom.
Tell me a bit about Black Bottom.
Oh, Black Bottom was a great place to live. It was a community.
Now, those were European immigrant communities before African Americans moved to that area.
And we had different nationalities over there, and everybody was like family.
By 1940, Black Bottom really becomes a super predominantly African-American community.
My dad, early on, he'd be a paper boy, just do odd jobs to bring in some additional money because he grew up on the Black Bottom.
That would be today's Ford Field, Comerica Park.
My grandma was a domestic. So like in the movie The Help, because my grandma had a third grade education, so it was really difficult for her to find meaningful work.
And there was a housing shortage, and there also was discrimination. So what they had to do was sleep in shifts. Whoever worked the night shift would sleep during the day. Whoever worked the day would, of course, sleep at night.
It was my dad and my grandma and my great-great-grandma for a moment. Their income was about $80 a month. That was not a lot, but they managed to survive.
So many Black people were not able to find a decent place to live.
It's a challenge, and it causes a lot of socio and economic friction.
My dad grew up in a rooming house, so you had 8 families in this big house, and you all had to share a kitchen and laundry.
They had to move around. They had to live in 2 or 3 different places with different relatives.
You could have one room for one family. People had to learn how to get along.
Eventually, they did find someone that would rent a place to them, but they realized the most important part of the housing and living was to be able to buy your place.
Because of city neighborhoods, an expanding city at that point, Northeast Side, Northwest Side, homeowner associations, block clubs that were largely white weren't very much interested in having African Americans live in their neighborhood.
She found this house, it was for sale, and she went to the family, a husband and a wife, and they told her that we're not supposed to sell to Black people. They liked her. And the wife said, I really want us to sell to her and her family so that she have a nice place for her daughter.
So they were able to buy a home on land contract, but at that time they could only live in a certain part of Detroit.
And I remember growing up, I didn't believe that story. Like, yeah, right, they can't sell to Black people, what do you mean? And my dad showed me the deed. And it was in the deed to the home, yeah.
Many of them had come from the South. Hey, we thought this was the land of opportunity, and we're caught up in the same trick bag we were in Mississippi and Alabama and South Carolina.
Being that this is about the Great Migration, a lot of people associate that with strictly being only a Black thing.
I think it's important to point out that a lot of Southern whites moved here too. Detroit becomes the 4th largest city in America by 1940.
Thousands and thousands of Southern white people that came up, along with the Jim Crow South Blacks. Everybody brought their Southern ways with them.
There was a bus line called the Brooks Bus Line, and it would run from Detroit to down 23 in eastern Kentucky, and then it would run from Detroit to Paducah on the west. And, you know, these people from Kentucky go back and forth, getting the jobs, coming home on the weekends. My county, Cumberland County in southern Kentucky, had 17,000 people in it before the war. After the war, it had 7,000. That many people left to go mostly north, you know.
I'm going to use the term hillbillies. A lot of people associate that with as a derogatory term. I don't.
We talk about Hazel Tucky sometimes and Taylor Tucky, as you had the people coming from Kentucky and Tennessee moving up to Detroit.
You'd hear of Ipsy Tucky, Taylor Tucky.
Oh, yeah. You know, everybody's got to have somebody they look down on, right? You know, and so it's why I think people from that part of the country, whether it was Kentucky or Tennessee or Arkansas or wherever, West Virginia, they sort of stuck together. When we came up here, we found a community of other migrants from the South, and mostly from that part of the South, and they all went to the same church, became our social group. It was, you know, folks looking for support from other people who understood their story and their journey.
The legacy of the union auto worker carries on to this day in Detroit.
I come from labor. Labor is in my blood. It comes from the history of my family.
Detroit's new mayor, Mary Sheffield, elected in fall 2025.
Detroit, we did it. I know that I would not be here had it not been for just legendary civil rights activists and politicians who really paved the way. As the first woman in 324-year history, there was a lot of sacrifices that were made.
None of us can rest, and that is why we are marching today.
Sheffield's Great Migration story. Her grandfather, Horace Sheffield Jr., came with his family from Georgia in 1918.
He landed in Black Bottom, went on to work at the Ford Rouge plant, was instrumental in getting African Americans into leadership in the UAW, and just was an organizer, a mobilizer, and he knew how to unite people.
Horace Sheffield Jr. was integral to the civil rights movement, working with Martin Luther King Jr. on the freedom marches in Detroit and Washington, D.C. Muri's father, Horace Sheffield III, watched it happen.
And he really shaped me at a young age to stand up for justice, to know the importance of service, just fighting for everyday people.
Detroit's population is growing, more than 12,000 in 1 year, according to the city of Detroit, a recent upswing not seen since the 1950s. As the city's core develops, community activists worry outlying neighborhoods might be left out.
We can continue to build nice skyscrapers and buildings, but if Detroiters don't have access and they're not participating, then we're really building a city where our own residents don't have access to the growth of Detroit. We don't want to grow a city where most of our residents don't benefit.
In Detroit politics, the name Coleman Young, the city's first Black mayor, often comes up. But the Sheffield name resounds for many too.
My grandfather, to this day, there's no place I can go throughout this city where people still don't feel and remember his impact, which I think speaks volumes to who he was as a person, that people still to this day can talk about who he was and what he meant to this city.
Dearborn. It sits right on the border of Detroit. It's home to Ford Motor Company and the first Arab American majority city in the United States.
My grandfather and my mom's family, they came over here in 1974 at the time when the Lebanese Civil War was about to start, but also for the opportunity at pursuing the American dream. My mother was about 4 years old. She came over here and obviously entered the school system at the time, and for my grandfather, just a regular laborer, while waiting for a job on the line, found a job at a local bakery, making $50 a week. And it was that kind of held him over until he found a good paying job on the line. Dearborn is home to about 110,000 people, the fastest growing city in Michigan according to the last decennial census, about 12% growth. 50% of the residents here are foreign born. After the war in Iraq, you saw a large migration of Iraqi nationals to southeast Michigan, and so we have a large Iraqi American community. With the civil strife that is persistent in Yemen, you see a large Yemeni migration. And within the Dearborn community in particular, amongst the large Arab American communities, the largest I would say is about the Lebanese and the Yemeni community, and then you kind of have the Iraqi community, and then a scattering of Syrian, Palestinian, Jordanian going across the Middle East and North African border. My father's story, slightly different. He came over here in the early 80s, born or raised in Saudi Arabia, although Lebanese. Ultimately, my father, for most of my young age, was a trucker delivering the seats for the F-150. The best truck in America. I have to say that. I also believe it because I drive one.
You look at all of the people in Detroit, almost all of the business and restaurants were all Cantonese because they all came from Canton, China.
The history of the Chinese in Detroit starts here. Central United Methodist Church, downtown on Woodward.
A Central Methodist Church had these missionaries that came to Canton, China, invited the Chinese people to come to Detroit, and the church would help them get established. So in the late 1800s, Chinese people started coming. The city gave them this area by 3rd and Michigan for their community. And by the 1930s or 40s, there were like 4,000 people living in Chinatown. And then in 1960, they decided to build the Bagley Road exit off of the lodge, so they were saying they have to move you for urban development.
The end for the next Chinatown at Cass and Peterborough inevitable. It tried hanging on, but by the 80s, most of the original residents were gone.
We were living in the suburbs, doing what all immigrant families wanted for their children, to get educated, get good jobs, start their own businesses, and move to the suburbs.
In 2023, one of the last historic Detroit Chinatown buildings was demolished. Asian American groups and community leaders are now planning what might be a Pan-Asian cultural district in the future.
You can't make up for what you didn't do before, but you can make up for what you're going to do now. And that's what we're trying to do, is revitalize a neighborhood that's been basically abandoned, honoring our ancestors and the work and the risks that they took, especially these women that were not valued then, and come over to this country and raise all of these children that became the Chinese population in Detroit.
Well, I was always one of the few young people that actually wanted to always hear stories, because I'm like, how do you pick up a family and move during a war? How do you live in a camp? How do you find a new country to go live in?
The reason we left Vietnam in 1975 because of the war. We left on a boat, stranded on sea, not sure where we're going to be. We landed in Thailand, and then after that, we got sponsored from a church in Lansing, Michigan.
We suffered a terrible, one of the darkest days in history, actually marked as the very first genocide. And that was in 1915 when the Ottoman Empire wanted to exterminate the Armenians. That's why there's Armenians all over the world. France, Romania, Greece, America, Canada, everywhere. My grandparents ended up in Canada.
When my father was 17, he married my mother, and then he was quickly recruited by the CIA, along with the Hmong men and the villagers in Laos.
They started out actually in what's now Western Ukraine, which before World War II was part of Poland. And then during the war, they started emigrating to stay ahead of like the Soviet army and all that. And they worked their way west. They worked their way into Austria, where they were in a displaced person camp.
When the U.S. pulled out of Laos, anyone that was Hmong was persecuted.
So my father, he was a South Vietnamese military personnel. He came to Michigan in 1975. We stayed in Vietnam.
I was born in Vientiane in Laos. When I was 8 years old, our family got sponsored from a refugee camp in Thailand because of the Vietnam War.
For 7 years, we lost connection with him, and we always believed that he has lost his life during the war. So in 1982, we actually reunited with him, my mom, and 8 children.
The family, after World War II, got split up amongst many different countries.
The only way that my grandmother in Canada was able to survive is when they were coming through the villages. Well, my great-grandmother and grandfather took my grandmother to the people next door who were Turkish and said, take Zarui as your baby. Don't let them take her and kill her. And so this Turkish family held on to my grandmother for about almost a year. And that's the way that she sort of escaped being slaughtered by the Turks.
So my mom was pregnant. She had 3 children at that point. They trekked from northern Laos into the southern border, and they swam across the Mekong River in the middle of the night. And my father was the only one who knew how to swim. And so he found a scrap rubber tire, fastened it around my mom's waist, and pulled my mom and my 3 older siblings across the river.
When my mother and father decided to migrate over here to the United States, because my dad was working for Ford Motor in Canada, he had an opportunity to come over to the Ford Rouge plant. My sisters, older sisters, they were born in Canada. Myself and my younger sister, we were born here in Detroit.
My mom was born in 41 when Ukraine was under Nazi control, and so her birth certificate says Ukraine, and my aunt was born in the displaced person camp. She was born in Austria.
I spent my first 3 years of my life in the refugee camp, where a majority of the Hmong refugees had been placed. Then in 1987 is when our family was accepted into the United States.
When they were all in Austria, the displaced person camp, the goal was to find someplace else to go to emigrate to. My mom and my grandparents, they actually were accepted to Argentina. So they went to Buenos Aires.
Our sponsor was in a Black community. We never saw a Black person before. When our sponsor, which is a husband and wife from a church that went and welcomed us, I didn't know how to react. But the first time that he hugged me, I knew that it was family.
My grandmother's sister, they did not make the cut for Argentina. They came to Detroit.
We started going to church. It was the old Masonic temple. And if you go there to this day, you'll even see above the columns, it says in Armenian, Hai Getron, which means the Armenian Center.
It was hard to find work and stuff in Buenos Aires. The economy wasn't very strong at that time. My grandmother's sister said, "Oh, come up to Detroit." So then the family picked up from Argentina and did the move up to Detroit, where they lived on the west side.
I think the reason why I'm telling that story is that once I'd grown up, it was like this division that we hear about white and black. And so I didn't know what they were talking about in the media about chaotic stuff and that's going on versus what I'm living, where here's a community that's taking care of us.
This is the Armenian story. It doesn't end, okay? It continues to this day. We're 100 and some years after the genocide, but people are still feeling it. And we basically sing the praises of those who have sacrificed for us to be here, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here.
Something that I really didn't know about my dad's side of the family, they were Jews that came out of Romania. There's a lot of the history that wasn't written down. We don't have photographs. It was erased.
Detroiters here trying to keep their history, Jewish history. The Zuckelman Holocaust Center in suburban Farmington Hills was created to do just that.
So before the war, Michigan had a very thriving Jewish community. We always have. We were very integral, even during the Holocaust, trying to send aid and help to those in Europe. And so for many people, they knew that coming to Michigan, they would have help when they came here afterwards.
I didn't learn about the Holocaust till much later in life, probably when I was in what we now call middle school, because at the time, parents didn't think it was a good idea to talk to their kids about the Holocaust. It would be too traumatic, too upsetting.
Gil Offen's father, Sam, was a young man in Krakow when World War II started. At the center, descendants of Holocaust survivors talk about keeping their family's stories alive. And here, Irene Miller tells her story.
I came to live permanently in Michigan in 1970. I married in Israel when I just turned 18 to a man from Detroit.
Then there's Max Markovitz. He came to Detroit 7 decades ago.
My father's name was Aaron, first name, and my mother's name was Ida.
Max started life near Mukachevo, Czechoslovakia, born in 1929.
At the beginning of the war in 1939, Czechoslovakia was occupied by the Germans. Czechoslovakia was spread up in the several parts of the country. One part was given to the Hungarian government. Hitler even came in to our town. They always said to us, "You should go to Palestine. No place for you here." Well, there was an impossibility.
It's a mission for me to let the world know what hate and prejudice did and what hate and prejudice can do again unless we learn from it. My extended family was close to 100 members. Not a single one of them survived.
Sometimes in spring and March of 1944, the Hungarian police with the German officers came into our house and telling us, "You have to be ready in half an hour and be outside on the street. You're only allowed to take one small suitcase for the whole family."
Irene Miller's family was in Warsaw as Jews were being sent to Nazi death camps. Some escaped to the Soviet Union, but Miller was taken there by force.
Soviet soldiers kicked in the door of the cabins, and they marched us to a train station. And they would shove in as many people as they could in each of those box cars. With the doors closed, they delivered us to a labor camp in the Siberian taiga. If you were outside, any part of your skin exposed, wouldn't take more than a few minutes, it would get frostbitten. We didn't have clothing for that kind of a climate. They shipped us thereafter to Uzbekistan. While in Siberia, we were hungry every day. In Uzbekistan, we almost starved to death.
It took us about 3 days before we arrived to Poland in a place called Auschwitz. My mom and my younger brother were taken to a place to take showers, but it was not water. It came out gas, poison gas.
Sam Offen? He was taken to a Nazi concentration camp near Krakow, then to the Mauthausen-Gusen complex. Max Markovits found himself there too.
We were taken to Mauthausen, Austria. It was bad. Hell on earth was there. Picking up stones and walking up and down.
And it was a rock quarry. And their job was to take rocks, big rocks, and break them into smaller rocks. But not just standing still. This quarry has 186 steps. And I know this because I've been there and I counted the steps. And their job was to take big, heavy rocks and go run up and down these steps all day long carrying these rocks. If you didn't run, the guards would shoot at you.
The Gestapo was all over the place. And we were so happy to get out. We were liberated by the American army. It was just like, that's the end of the war. We thought so. A few days later, I was also eating good food from the American army, from their rations, and it was a little bit too much for my stomach. And I was sick. My stomach was in bad shape, so they put me on light food. I was in the hospital for about 10 days.
Markovits made his way to a Jewish refugee house in Great Britain.
They wanted us to go to London. What I learned at the trade school, sponsored by the Jewish Refugee Committee, they hired instructors, they hired engineers to teach us. I was placed in an electronic school. In the meantime, I got in touch with my uncles in Pittsburgh. I inquired about the embassy. How long do I have to wait here in England to get to the United States? Oh, the quota is very high right now. I said, another 3 years. What?
Sam Offen got to Great Britain, too.
Before the war, my father remembered that his grandmother used to write letters to cousins in Detroit asking for help. Well, after the war, they were in London, and they were trying to think of the name. They weren't sure, and they sent a letter and put on it Hirschman, that was the name they remembered, Detroit, Michigan.
After the war, about 100,000 Holocaust survivors come to the United States, and about 4,000 of them settle here in Michigan.
My quota came through, and I'm ready to go to the United States. My sister and I packed up. We boarded the ship, Queen Elizabeth, and it took us about 5 days to get to New York. Then my cousins, two brothers, lived in Detroit area. So finally I got to Detroit. I felt better, much better there.
The cousins that were in Detroit somehow got the letter, sent them back a letter asking for more details, and they connected like that. And they said, if you come to Detroit, you'll have a family, and you'll have all the food you want.
As Sam Offen got older, daughter Gail said speaking about the Holocaust became his life's work. With his electronics know-how, Max Markovits became an entrepreneur in Detroit, working with another Holocaust survivor for a time.
We were partners in the electronic business, and the name of the company was Mark and Ferber's Electronic Service Company. We were doing quite well. Both of us did very well.
So all my aunts and uncles, most of them lived here in Detroit, in Southwest Detroit. Some, though, did live in Saginaw. Some were in Chicago, but the majority of the family is from Detroit. My mother's family is from Zacatecas, Mexico.
Corktown, the original Irish enclave, not far from downtown Detroit. It's here you'll find Michigan Central. Lest we forget other people who've been part of this neighborhood's history, like the Latino families who made this their destination in Detroit.
So we have been here for a very long time, but yet our history has never been documented in the way that other communities have documented their history. The African American community proudly has documented their community, and that's a huge part of Detroit. The Arab American community has documented their history.
This gathering, hosted by the Voces Oral History Project. Voces, that's Spanish for voices.
But a comprehensive collection of these stories has yet to be done, and this committee came together to invite you here tonight because that's what we're going to do.
You know, this neighborhood has been revitalized many times over by new families coming in. They're new transplants, you can call them. They come in. They don't know any of this. And I think they'll be more than interested, everyone across the board, to learn about us and our stories.
We have to tell our own story. That's why I'm really proud of the work that the Voices Committee is interested in doing.
Filmmaker Len Rajeski Fraga used some audio recordings from the 1970s to help figure out how his family came to Michigan. Well, the Mexican Revolution was going on in 1919.
2 times it want to hang me, and they get on your nerve. And how come they want to hang you? Yeah, that's the way they used to do it because one morning I invited.
Back in Mexico, my grandfather was a vaquero, basically a ranch hand cowboy.
You see, your mama or your grandma and this her farm and me. But we know she had one since she was kids.
I knew of my 2 uncles that had recorded my grandparents telling their own story, sometimes in English, sometimes in Spanish. That changed everything.
This is the story of 2 remarkable people.
From that came Michoacan to Michigan, a documentary first produced in 1994. Fraga taught high school video production back then.
From the very start, it's always been a family project.
The Mexican state of Michoacan lies west of Mexico City. Now there's an updated version of the film edited by Len's cousin's daughter, Julie Brazen. They're fascinated with the family lore. The Fragas made it to Texas, but what really happened when they were busted flat in San Antonio, waiting for a train?
For them, as they were walking down the street, this Mexican approached them, Mexican-American.
You want to go to Michigan? And I told him if I want to go to Michoacan.
Dad thought that he was saying Michoacan, and at that point, as much suffering as they'd been through and disappointment, he was ready to go back.
The people there told him that Michigan, you can make a lot of money there. They had been there before.
We had 16 train cars full of people, and I didn't have 1 nickel in my pocket from San Antonio, Texas to Michigan, to Saginaw. 1 nickel.
In Saginaw, Fraga's grandfather picked sugar beets, the family barely getting by. They moved to North Branch in Michigan's Thumb for several years and had more children.
As their children got older, they were looking for work, and the place to go was Detroit.
The family, 6 generations now. Fraga's dive into the Mexican side of his family history has even affected how he says his name.
Since I've been using more Spanish and visits to Mexico, I say Fraga, and most of the family here say Frega, the Americanized version. And I know sometimes they look at me and they go, who does he think he is? But
Fraga's also done some research on the Polish side of his family, still working on the traditional pronunciation of that name.
Rajewski, I believe. I've got to do better about the pronunciation. Went to Poland and found a little town where the name came from. You know, the American culture now is, I'm half Mexican, my kids are a quarter, my grandkids are an eighth. I mean, and unless you keep those stories and themes alive, they're easily lost.
If my uncles could do it with reel-to-reel recorders, I mean, all of you should be doing. The power of these things compared to those early cameras. But the first thing is, you gotta do it now.
Now, an imperative. When people die, histories can die too.
We were motivated in a way to form this group, Voices, because of the work of one of the musicians, Cesar Peña, who said, I need to make a documentary about all these fantastic musicians that came out of Southwest Detroit and Del Rey. But unfortunately, he passed away.
Back when, Cesar Peña toured with famed bluesman Albert King. Peña died in 2022. Meanwhile, Aaron Barndollar and Ozzy Rivera had already been posting interviews on YouTube done years ago, like one on musician Frank Panchito Lozano, who'd been performing since the 1940s.
This must be you here, Panchito.
in the background.
Yeah, I'm right there.
Yeah.
Lozano, horn player, band leader, and the first Mexican-American principal in Detroit Public Schools, died in 2014. Now, cameras gather oral histories again.
You knew everybody.
Including Barn Dollar's uncle.
My grandfather had a farm, and my dad did not like working on the farm. And he come to Detroit, and he got a job dishwashing. And he started out as a dishwasher and worked his way up to be the head chef of the Port Shelby Hotel.
He was the Mexican Gordon Ramsay. Never went to culinary school, but he could do anything in the kitchen.
With the oral histories coming in, Mauricio Dominguez edits an interview with Deacon Raul Feliciano of the Detroit Archdiocese and Catholic activist Beatriz Esquivel Ramos.
The people had that church built. The people built that little chapel.
They're talking about the Our Lady of Guadalupe Church of Southwest Detroit that dates back to the early 1920s.
Yeah, the first Mexican national parish in the Midwest. So not just Michigan, just Midwest overall.
Those people set for a priest in Mexico because there were no Spanish-speaking priests.
I think that just speaks to the core of why it's so important to do this project. You know, because stories like this, that if there's no documentation available and if there's no way for people to find out about it, then how are they going to know, right?
With endeavors like this come limitations. So many more people to talk to, but there's only so much funding and people who have the time to collect these stories.
I'm only one guy. I can only record, edit so much. So we're officially planning, what's it going to look like to expand, to grow this team and to bring more people from the community who can help with the archiving, the recording, the interviewing, everything.
We're just scratching the surface. This Latino community has been here since 1918.
We hope that what we're doing with the Mexican-American culture is an impetus for other groups to say, hey, what about me? What about the Polish or the Germans or the Irish, whatever? As the deeper you dive into history, the more you realize all the groups that have contributed to who we are in Michigan. Unless you tell your own story, not too many people are going to tell it for you. And that's history. The victors tell the story, right?
And my grandparents came here in 1917 and they settled in Hamtramck. I have a picture of them that shows them at the Detroit train station on the day that they got there from Georgia. And I guess there must have been photographers around and we'll take your picture and commemorate this. So they, for whatever reason, and they weren't wealthy or anything, they had this picture taken and my Aunt Mary standing on a stool looking like shocked at it all. But that's how my dad's side of the family got here.
Karen Batchelor's dad would become a prominent doctor in Detroit. He trained at Wayne University's medical school during World War II.
I became a mom in August of 1975. And it was around that time after my son was born that I realized, wow, I don't know a lot about our family history. And within 10 months, going to the Burton Historical Collection at Detroit's main library and writing off to a historical society in Erie, Pennsylvania, where my maternal great-grandmother had come from, I was able to put together enough facts and found a Revolutionary War patriot. It was William Hood. He fought in the Battle of Fort Freeland, where they came to the rescue of a fort that had been taken over by the British. And that kind of got me started.
This is my great-great-grandmother, and her family line takes me back to 1630 in this country.
My genealogy mentor took me aside and said, I really think you ought to apply to DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. Mom talked about how she had been to a concert in D.C. when she was a student at Howard. It was 1939. And it was when Marian Anderson had to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial because she had been denied access to use DAR's Constitution Hall, which was a concert venue and still is.
75,000 massed before Lincoln Memorial to hear Marian Anderson, colored contralto, make her capital debut at the Great Emancipator Shrine. Refusal of the DAR to let her use their hall and a countrywide controversy.
What was the image for a lot of people with the DAR?
Well, certainly in the Black community, people were, people did ask me, why would you want to join a group like that who had discriminated against us? And here's what I would say was the reason. When I was 14, ninth grade, I integrated a school in Detroit. And it was on the east side. I had to take a bus an hour and a half each way. And my parents wanted me to do this. And this was part of their way, is that this was the year after the Civil Rights Act, and I was to integrate this school. There were 4 of us kids at the school, and we weren't in class with one another. None of the Black kids were together. There were no Black teachers. It was probably one of the loneliest years of my life. It was the first time I ever got called the N-word. And I remember after a couple weeks getting home from one of those days, and I was sobbing. And I asked my parents, why are you making me do this? And Dad said, and I will never forget this, it has been maybe my mantra through all the years since, but he said, because somebody has to.
Tonight, we present a landmark in television entertainment.
1977, the year the miniseries Roots premiered on network television. Suddenly, Americans started doing their own genealogy research.
In July of 1977, 2 women at the Ezra Parker chapter of DAR in Royal Oak, Michigan, they were inviting me to apply to them and become a member. They were going to sponsor me.
Applications to other chapters ignored, but Karen was in. It made local headlines and the New York Times front page.
So join us for Good Morning America.
Then, national television.
On ABC.
There were a lot of news stories. I did a lot of interviews. This was the beginning of a lifetime journey for me doing family history. And then these 2 pictures are Aunt Clara. So the first person I started talking to about the family history. And she was the self-appointed family historian, whether you wanted to listen to her or not. And I wish I had listened more intently. I get a lot of satisfaction from going through historic records and finding a clue and seeing what more I can find about a family history. Remember, I started off not knowing much other than what we talked about at the dinner table. And now I've been able to go back to 1630 in this country. I have 8 Revolutionary War patriots. It's beyond my wildest dreams.
A half-century later, Bachelor's still digging into her family's past.
Grandma kept me going on the research, and she lived to be 97. And every time we talked, she would end the conversation with, and I saw people hanging from a tree. And in fact, I was able to document later that there was a lynching in her area in Georgia when she was a young teenager, that no Black people would have been at the lynching unless they were the target. But she would have seen the aftermath of this. And she always talked about it, but I was able to document later what she probably had seen. Family history is no longer something that you could call a hobby, as it was when I first started. It is a cultural imperative. The more that we know about ourselves, the more we understand how we are an integral part of the fabric of this country. I mean, I'm more American than apple pie. And I think it's important for our children to understand this, because they may not be learning it in school, and it may not be available as readily available today as it was last week. But the fact is, we know more about who we come from now than we knew in my grandmother's generation, and certainly in my parents' generation. So this is the journey.
My family came to Detroit via my grandmother, and she came from Natchez, Mississippi. In 1919, 1920, she came on train. I do know that. So I kind of get goosebumps thinking, hey, I'm walking in my grandmother's footsteps, literally, you know? My other grandmother, she would come and visit us from New Jersey. She was on one of the last trains that left from here before it closed down. So I have both ends when somebody came here and then also one of the last trains that left going east.
Michigan Central, a Motor City destination again. Now a place for innovators shaping America's transportation future. For generations, Detroiters' resilience and ingenuity helped transform America. Our history, part of the nation's evolving story.
Destination Detroit. This program was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you. Thank you. To learn more about this Detroit PBS series, visit detroitpbs.org/Destination Detroit. You'll find our conversations about Michigan Central and other stories about why people came to Detroit and the lives they built here.
I actually came to the city with an understanding that this history, the heritage of what mobility and innovation has looked like, I wanted to be here with that.
My nephews and nieces and future generations, just kind of letting them know this is where we came from, this is the standard, go forth and prosper.
I had never planned to come back to Detroit again. I loved it out in Northern Virginia, outside of DC, but I've fallen back in love with Detroit, so I'm happy to be back.
Your grandpa, he was already working for Ford. What did your grandmother do?
Waited for him to come home with his check from Ford so she could go shop.
This is a wonderful idea. I think maybe one day my kids will look back and see this and smile.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.